My brother-in-law, Mike, is a high school football coach in South Carolina. His first job as a coach, though, he was a football coach, athletic director in the poorest small county of South Carolina. He dressed out about 15 players to play varsity football, a little 1A program. And the best hope he had each season was that he could eke out a couple of wins from a 1A program that was even more pitiful than he was. We went to one of the games. I didn't think I would ever see this, but the punter for the other team dropped it and caught it a little too high and punted the ball back over his head. It's pretty bad football. But Mike's biggest heartbreak is not the football record. His heartbreak is that his students on the whole had absolutely no spunk, no ambition about football or about anything else in life. Most of their parents worked in the factory in town. It was the only industry in this small town. And most of the children were told over and over and over that their lot in life was to work in the factory too. It just is what it is. In fact, most of the parents told their children the high school thing, it doesn't matter that much. History and algebra, you don't ever need any of that stuff. If you get a degree, who cares? It'd be good, whatever. Mike tried so hard to inspire these beautiful young lives, but the family narrative has so much power. The way the family story gets told is usually so influential that it takes something huge to change the script for another generation. And so most of them just lived into the script they were told. I've wondered, who gets to write the family story? There's a collective family memory that gets passed down from generation to generation. So who gets to decide which stories will shape the next generation? Charlotte Lindy has written a book on this kind of story called Working the Past, Narrative and Institutional Memory. Some stories told over and over and over become a paradigm, an example to be followed for those who come behind. And a paradigmatic story has incredible power. For instance, an insurance company might tell every new young agent about the successful career of their most successful, top-selling agent and the way he tricked the system, the way he played the shell games. And eventually, that story told over and over will shape the company's culture. Another company might tell about how the founder never cut corners. Even if it meant losing a profit, her good name meant more than anything, meant more than any quarterly returns. Always do the right thing. It'll come back to you, she would say. And the story told over and over and over eventually influences the culture. Or a paradigmatic story might be, my parents worked in the factory. We work in the factory. You will work in the factory. Every family has passed down the paradigmatic stories. And our faith family, our faith tradition has paradigmatic stories too. They're the stories that we tell over and over and over until they start to shape the people. A wandering Aramean was my father. And they wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger. And Jesus said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." These stories, if they get told over and over and over within the family, eventually they will start to shape the culture. They'll start to shape who we become. But I'm still immensely curious about who gets the power to determine which stories are passed on and how they will be shaped. For instance, the Hebrews could have gone in any number of directions in telling their story, and it would have still been true. I mean, the Israelites had a rough go of it. Beaten up by Assyria over and over, enslaved by the Egyptians, a long stretch of wilderness wandering, no address, no homeland, no security. Each night they tuck the children into bed and they can't lock the doors because there are no doors because they are homeless. There's a marauding enemy perhaps just over the hill. They could come wipe out the whole tribe. War, aggression, slavery has been the way of life. So when you tuck the children into bed at night and the grandson says, "Grandpa, tell me a story. Tell me a story that your granddaddy used to tell you." Usually you tell the story best you can remember the way you heard it. But who upstream decided how to influence and shape the story that would be told? You see, one choice, one way of telling the Hebrew story, and it'd be completely accurate, would be to just tell it over and over as a story of woe and disappointment with God. My grandparents told me that their grandparents were homeless, and their grandparents were homeless, and their grandparents were slaves, and this is why our family's been angry with God for generations. I know people like that. You do too. People whose paradigmatic story is that they're victims. The world's been cruel to me and my people, and my response is just going to be bitterness. One way to tell the story is our people are victims, and we can reinforce a negative narrative. All Hollingsworths are losers. You know that. You will be too. All right. But another way to tell the story is to idealize the past and put it different from the current hardships as a time that was wonderful. My grandparents told me stories about when their grandparents had a home, and I mean, sure, they were slaves in Egypt, but Egypt was beautiful. They had a roof over their head. My grandparents were part of a brave group of people who, through their own cunning and bravery, stood up to the Egyptian captors in this dramatic and romantic story. And they left in bravery and they found a new land. But today, we live in this horrible oppression, shared land and instability. But wow, back in the day. You see, one way the Israelites could have told the story was to romanticize the past and just stay there. Just keep telling those stories over and over, always looking back, nostalgic remembering. You remember back when my pants fit and our church was full, and before the kids moved away, and when Norman Rockwell was still doing magazine covers. Nostalgia is a way of remembering that romanticizes the past and then just camps out. Just get a tent. Remember Archie Bunker singing, "Boy, the way Glenn Miller played. Songs that made the hit parade, guys like us, we had it made. Those were the days." But the Israelites chose to tell the story in a different way. Our ancestors in the faith story did not shape a paradigmatic story that says, "Oh, we're the poor, beaten up, victimized, marginalized people, and I guess we always will be." And whoever influenced the family story didn't say, "You remember when things used to be good? Remember how it used to be? Don't you remember? Wouldn't it be great to go back to the good old days?" Instead, they told the story this way. God delivers. Whatever we have been through, God has delivered us out of it. Let us give thanks to God. Not, hey, look at us, we overcame, bootstraps, all of that. But God is the one who delivers. Sure, we've had a hardship, but God delivered us. Remember Egyptian slavery? Well, God delivered us. Remember, we wandered as homeless people for a whole season, but God delivered us. Remember, we entered into a promised land flowing with milk and honey. God delivered us. That's the story they kept telling over and over and over until it became a part of the family consciousness. Listen again to part of our psalm for today. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when our enemies attacked us, then they would have swallowed us up alive. When their anger was kindled against us, then the flood would have swept us away. The torrent would have gone over us. Then others of us would have gone into the raging waters. Blessed be the Lord. This kind of purposeful remembering, focused on the redeeming power of God, gives us the courage to step into an uncertain future, buoyed by the never-failing hand of God. Of course, not all remembering is on purpose. So much of our remembering just kind of happens to us. We see a postcard or we reread a book we read as a child and it happens. We drive a stretch of road that we drove a long time ago. Things that trigger a memory that just jumps up and grabs us without our bidding at all. For me, the smell of double mint gum always propels me to the back pew of a Pentecostal holiness church in Greenwood, South Carolina. I'm sitting next to if I smell double mint, I'm sitting next to my grandmother in a pew in Greenwood. Every time I hear Fleetwood Mac from the 1970s sing Gold Dust Woman, it makes me smile and I can't help it. And I'm not telling you why. The point is, there are some memories that just happen to us. But there is still a holy discipline about how we choose to name and categorize what we remember. And somehow the Israelites, our ancestors in this faith family, remembered inside of their hope. They remembered and told over and over again about God's faithfulness, God's deliverance, and they told the story so many times and in so many ways that it became the family paradigm. Remember, God delivers. Remember, God delivers. The Strong's Exhaustive Concordance is a big book, and it is exhaustive. And it has little bitty print, and it has the use of every single word in the King James Version of the Bible. Big book. So even with my glasses on, I might be off on my count, but I went through and counted. I counted 268 times that some form of the word remember shows up in our scriptures. 268 times. Our ancestors are yelling at us across the centuries, commanding us to remember and to shape our remembering in a way that tells the faithful story of God. Not nostalgia, but remembering in a way that produces a reservoir of reminders that we do not walk alone. Remembering what happened back there so that we have the courage to go there. a kind of remembering that also fosters gratitude. If you focus on the faithful acts of God that have delivered you and delivered you and delivered you to this good day, you can't help but be grateful. Many of you in the room know the name of Eddie Rickenbacker. He was, of course, World War I fighting ace, Medal of Honor recipient, all of that. But it was in World War II, October 1942, that he had the most frightening adventure of his whole life. He and his crew were flying B-17 to deliver an important message to General MacArthur when somewhere over the South Pacific, beyond the reach of radio, his plane got dangerously low on fuel. He had to ditch the plane into the ocean, and for nearly a month, they lived in rafts with the sun and the sharks, and worst of all, the starvation. They were just 8 days into that month when all of their food ran out, all the rations were gone, destroyed by salt water or whatever. They were starving to death. And on what they calculated to be a Sunday, Captain Rickenbacker asked another captain to lead a worship service. Can you imagine? A worship service that included a prayer of deliverance and a hymn of praise of all things. But after the service was over, most of them fell asleep because they didn't have energy for much of anything else. And somewhere in the nap, a seagull came and landed on the captain's head. A few of them were awake, and they saw it, and they froze because everybody was staring, realizing that if the captain could catch the bird, it would mean food, and they might live. And quietly and quickly, he did. He caught the seagull, which means they were able to eat the flesh of the bird for a while. They were able to use other parts to catch fish. Long story, they survived because he caught this seagull. One lone seagull, hundreds of miles from land, and it was the means of God's deliverance. Well, Captain Rickenbacker, in his retirement, on the coast of Florida, every Friday evening, all the way up to his death in 1973, every Friday evening, stooped over and slow, he would take a bucket of shrimp to the docks to feed the seagulls, because it was a way for him to remember that in long days past, God delivered him. Those who remember the faithful deliverance of God have the courage to move into an uncertain future and the grace to be grateful. And I want that story to be my family story. I want to tell and recall and believe in the sure hand of God that has never broken covenant and who has always, always, always delivered. I've asked several times this morning, who has the power to tell the family story? You do. We all have the power to tell the family story. And the truth is, we have no choice. Because one way or the other, we are retelling what was given to us or redefining the story that was passed down. You are either accepting the script that was passed down to you and just telling it again, or you are consciously retelling the story with a new plot and new heroes. You are, whether you think you're choosing or not, you are shaping for the next generation stories of woe, or stories of nostalgia, or stories that shine light on the remarkable love of God who has never broken covenant. The psalmist said, "Our help is in the name of the Lord who has made heaven and earth. That's the family story of our ancestors. It's what they wanted us to remember. If this God who has always been faithful, who has always delivered, is whispering a new, fresh word for you today in how you can draw on that faith to move into a courageous future. In whatever way you feel God speaking, I hope you will have the courage to say yes. Let's respond as we stand and sing.